stereo azimuth, 10 tubes, 10 tubes, 10 tubes, 10 tubes. Sorry, I'm doing Jeremy Piven from Grosse Point Blank, for those of you who remember. Anyway, yes, Schiit, Folkvanger, 10 tubes, 2 preamp tubes at the front. Where am I? These two. 4 tubes, 4 tubes. All these are dual triodes. We'll go over it all in a minute. But yes, this thing is heavy. It is not a transformer coupled like amp. It is what's called like a OTC. There's no capacitors like in the signal path, and they use some sort of active circuit to remove the DCs. There's some other cool tech that's going on in here, but we'll get to all that in a minute. Just so you know, because I want to be fair and I want everybody to realize that the Folkvanger, if you're not aware, the Folkvanger was made, like 250 of them were made and sold. Not all of them US voltages. They made a few for international voltages, but it's no longer available. However, there's still some available on the used market, and I was able to, someone was kind enough to loan me one. Thank you. And actually listen to it and actually get to enjoy it, which is actually like crazy when you also think about there's only 250 of these made. So yeah, so this is a very, limited run, like Schiit amp, and it being like 10 tube. And so we're going to get into it. Folkvanger. That's probably too hot for so you can see. Basically, it says Folkvanger is kind of like a Valhalla in Norse mythos, or at least that's how we read it. One gets a hall, one gets a field, one gets a oin, one gets a Freya. In any case, our Folkvanger is also kind of like a Valhalla, but on lots of steroids. So just so everybody understands too, the Valhalla was Schiit like all tube amp. It is output transformerless, and it also has the same sort of thing where like DC like removes the DC or whatever. And that amp is great for like high impedance headphones, Sennheisers, especially like 650s, 600s, and some even like biodynamic, like high impedance headphones. That one tends a little bit sounding a little lean. The bass isn't like really like, it isn't like a tube amp, like a really warm. It's not going to make it sound like the Fisher like tube amp. They even advertise this is not your dad's tube amp. Like, it is not very vintage sounding. It's very actually like borderline clinical, I think, but it still like brings out like that tube sweetness and tube mid smoothness, but it is not at all like gonna give you that big bass bloom. It's gonna give you a lot of details, a lot of very liquid mids, a lot of clean details, but it is not somewhat closed off like soundstage, but it's still a very, very good amp and a very good price too. But that one basically is, you have a few different tubes. There's like 6 tubes in that one, right? So 4 tubes. Yeah, 4 tubes. Because you have 2 in the back and then 2 in the front. So you have like the preamp tube and then like the amp tube. And they use the same tubes. Like they use the 6922 variant is in the front. And then these tubes are the 6N, 6P dual triodes, which we'll get into in a second. So that's basically how it's run. So, and let's just go through the quick operation of it right quick. So what's kind of cool about this amp is that you have it's of course just unbalanced output. That's all we get. And we have the volume. We have this like recessed tray here, which is nice because normally like Schiit would bring, the top even, but that would make it like really hard, especially to get to these tubes. And then it also says, like you can't see it, but it says caution hot surfaces, which I'll get to in a second. But basically the operation volume, obviously with that Alps pot, you have 1 and 2, which there's 2 inputs on the back. So you can switch between your 2 inputs, 1 input or 2 input with the RCA jacks on the back. Gain, low and high gain. And then this guy, which is like a really odd little symbol. So you have this, you have that. Like what is this going on here? Basically what that is it's called an impedance doubler. Okay, and it's an impedance doubler circuit. And what it does is it engages another part of the circuit to where you can use low impedance headphones, but to the amp, it will act as if they are high impedance headphones plugged in. So, for example, you have Grados, which are like 32 ohms, or you have like the Fox X, like TH900, or maybe you have the Emutiques, or maybe you have TH600. Like those are also 32 ohms, and you can switch this and engage this, and it acts like there's, like maybe a, it kind of doubles or makes them high impedance. I don't know if it actually like doubles completely. I'll have to ask, but it just engages this active circuit, of course, is like solid state, but it gives it some more drive, because if you plug it in, like without it, like when I plugged in a 32 ohm headphone and I had it down and I also had it in low gain, the amp actually went into protection mode. So, because it was like driving too much. When I put it in high gain, I could hear it, but I mean, I had to like crank the volume. It was very quiet. So then I put the impedance doubler in, and it sounded fine, sounded great. And then I could even use low gain, and at that point I could drop down to low gain if I wanted to, if I so desired. And it does actually work like fairly well. It does actually give some excitement and adds versatility to the amp. I wouldn't say that it's like, if I had all low impedance headphones, would I probably, have it? I would probably say there's probably other, tube amps that do the same thing, but, or that sound probably better, but, a lot of times those, that requires like, output transformers and that adds distortion and you lose power. But with this, you kind of don't. So yeah, it's kind of a thing. I mean, it's kind of like really fun. But I still say that the best part about this is using like high impedance headphones, especially like HD 800s. So let's just look at the back real quick. We have the inputs, input 1, input 2, like I mentioned before, and then you also have a preamp out. So if you want to plug in your headphone or plug in a separate amp, and it works a lot like Schiit amps. You unplug the headphones in the back and it will activate the preamp outputs. It has the tube layout here. So 6N, 6P only, and it says unmatched. Okay. So you don't necessarily have to match them up and have them all like 8 matched tubes. You can just plug in whatever. 6N, 1P, or 60J8 pen out. And this says matched pair only. So you want to make sure whatever tubes you get into front, you get matched pairs. And then this side. This is kind of a new thing for Schiit too, right? So this is a rocker switch. Now, normal on a lot of like Schiit amps is a metal, switch, and they haven't really changed. Like even for the big stuff, and I'll pull out my old trusty Valley here so you can see. But usually it's like one of these guys, right? like one of these little dudes in the back. Now it's still, the switch is still in the back, but you know, some people are like, well, why did they do that? Why did they switch to this like rocker switch here? And I'll tell you why. It's because of this right here, the fuse. Because you're running such high like plate voltages, and there's a lot of, you know, things that can go wrong with like tube amps, you know, very likely that you might blow a fuse. So therefore, ergo, to, you know, swap out the tube, you don't have to take the whole thing apart to get to the fuse. You can just slide it out. I'm not going to really slide it out, but yeah, basically you would get like a little screwdriver. You would pull this out. It's a little tray, and then you would get out and you could switch out the fuse. But yeah, that's kind of a newer thing that I saw on this amp, and I doubt that I would see it on other Schiit stuff unless they make another like really high, you know, voltage like amp or something like that. So I don't know. But yeah, I saw it on that, which was kind of interesting. They did make these in black, and they did make some in silver as well, but still only, it's not like they did 250 in black, 250 in silver, just 250 total is what they did. Now let's get to the sound. Let's get to how did 10, you know, tubes sound, even though that they're Russian 6/8 6N tubes. And I think one of the quotes that, you know, somebody said, it's like a Valhalla on steroids, which, I mean, it really is. It's a lot of the same tech that was in the Valhalla, like went into this amp, but like a little bit more. And I think that with the Valhalla, like I said, it's kind of lean. You kind of miss that low end punch. You're not missing the low end punch with this. It's very warm, but the low end is very controlled. It doesn't sound very loose. It doesn't sound like very like tube bloom. It just sounds very like low liquid mids kind of, and you get these kind of like punchy lows. The mids, of course, are just like fantastically smooth and fantastically great. You can listen to vocals. There's no grain whatsoever at all. You get all that sense of detail out of it. And then the top end is just like very sweet and very sort of like controlled. The top end is almost kind of compressed a little bit, where the transients are really doesn't really jump out at you. It's really almost like has like a compression. And really, like overall, the dynamics are a lot controlled. They're not. This is not, to me, it didn't sound like a very like punchy or dynamic amp. The dynamics were very sort of like, I felt like always, you know, under control, and felt like there was like kind of almost like a soft limiter kind of keeping everything under control. All the details were able to like come through, and you could just put them on and just get like like all these like details and the room and everything that you could hear in, you know, like when I hooked it up to my Yggdrasil DAC, then I mean it just, you know, more details than some of my other amps, even my Quicksilver amp, even my Black Widow amp. It just had like more of that stuff. It doesn't have a lot of excitement or punch. It sounds very like refined, like fine wine. Like I wanted to have some wine and cheese with it. Like I just felt like it was, you know, this like very sort of like proper amp. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was the actual like type of headphones to use with it. Now, I haven't looked at the specs. I haven't even like looked at like how much, and maybe I can find the Folkvanger spec sheet. But from what I was listening to, no, it doesn't even say in here. What I was listening to is that some reason the HD 600s and the HD 650s sounded more sort of like stuffy, like it was missing some drive or missing some excitement that I mentioned before. When I put on, and that was both for the 600s and the 650s. When I put on the HD 800s though, things like came alive. I was like really, really, really floored when I put on HD 800s because of two reasons. Because number one, I heard all the details that the amp could bring, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of cool details. I had the soundstage of the 800s. I had the details of the amp. They're very, very well matched with synergy between the two. And then they were also had more drive than the HD 650s did or HD 600s did. They actually had more excitement. And I think it because the 600s and the 650s, they have a little bit more damping in them, which means that they have a little stuff in there like foam and things like that to keep them under control. And the HD 800s don't have as much of that going on. There's not as much damping going on. It's more of a free driver. And for that reason, like it really could get things going and get things moving. And I was like, wow, this is really, really good. So if you have like lower damped, headphones, like Grados are included in that, really. They're almost the same sort of thing where the driver is like more free to move. I think that's where this pairing like really pairs off between the amp and the headphone, because that's where the excitement in the drive and can get all the details out of it and just sound absolutely amazing. So, I mean, I could almost listen all day with this amp and the HD 800s because it still brings all of that like low end, like warmth that's not too bloomy, that has these really lush, like big mids. And then it just has this, really, like I said, really sort of like sweet top end that's very controlled. And then you have the drive, which all of that is playing into the HD 800's weaknesses and its strengths. And I think that that's where like it really paid off. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for listening and for watching. And please subscribe. Still trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers. Really appreciate it. And we'll catch you guys later.